this episode, we visit photographer Scot Langdon. We joined Scot during a photo shoot in Nashua. Afterward, Scot spoke about techniques used for portrait photography. I invited Scot to our production studio to view film clips taken during the photo shoot. Here we discussed how he directed various shots and his interaction with his subject. Scot also shared a preview of his current project, Women of Strength, a compilation of photos and biographies of women who have conquered adversity.
Hi, I'm Scot Langdon from Long Hill Photography, and welcome to my studio.
Hi, Scot. Scot does a lot of different types of photography, travel photography, commercial, and that. But we're really interested today in talking about portrait photography and the difference between taking a photograph portrait as opposed to, we will talk to some artists that do painted portraits, and compare and contrast some of those. For example, when we were watching you do a photo shoot just now, the background was very important to you. Mm-hmm. You're doing a black and white study, and why did you use a gray?
So with this particular project that I'm working on, it's called the Women of Strength. It's a black and white show that we're developing, and so I was really going for more neutral background. It's really about the women. It's not so much about the surroundings for this particular shoot. Okay. So that's what I was looking for, was something simple, something I could control, the lighting, the shape of the lighting on the face.
So we're talking the value studies and how important is what they're wearing and the texture that you're adding to a black and white photo.
Mm-hmm. What I look for are neutral colors, because I am looking for a good gray palette, mm-hmm. as well as whites and blacks. So depending on the individual and what their background is, it really kind of drives what that piece of clothing might be. There was a woman we photographed from the Sudan, and we had more traditional clothing. It was very it was busy, but it was traditional clothing for North Africa, and it's going to represent very nicely in black and white.
Oh, excellent. Very good. When we've talked to several artists, and they are very adamant that the human eye sees better than the camera, mm-hmm. Especially for their landscapes, and you've done travel photos. What do you say to that? Because your cameras were just amazing, and you were saying that you could even get into as close to their skin texture as possible. Mm-hmm. Do you see shadows in colors in the shadows that you can pick up? How is the camera different than the human eye?
So the human eye really sees very small subtleties the camera can't see. The camera tends to record things at a higher contrast. So what you end up losing is a little bit of detail in the darks and detail in the lights. You can adjust that in a post-processing, but if the photographer doesn't see it to be able to recognize it, then it's hard to know what you're fixing later on. But you definitely see subtleties where the light source is coming from, or bounced light is coming from.
We did talk to an artist about lost and found edges, and where you might have a deep shadow, mm-hmm. And a high contrast where you'd see really lit up on one side. Do you ever use that kind of technique also? Oh,
absolutely. When you light from a single source, a single light source, and create shape around a face. A lot of times you can shoot a profile picture with light coming the front, and you're shooting from the front, but you're shooting the side of the face with a front light source. And if you create high contrast, then you just get that rim lighting, and it's beautiful. And you can throw what you need to into the shadows and just pick up the highlights.
So you're talking some different compositions for your portrait photography. You would set up full face, profile. Do you position it in thirds too? Do you leave blank spaces around them? How do you set up a composition?
Oh, yeah, you raise a good point. To me, a photograph really is not, even a portrait, what I call an environmental portrait, can be the full body and utilizing the background and utilize the dead space or white space in the photo, because that's all part of the environment of where you are with that individual. So it's not just a headshot, it's not just waist up, but particularly where you've got a light source coming in through a window and it's lighting up most of the room. There's some tremendous light that's coming through there that you want to capture in the whole environment. And I used your rule of thirds all the time, whether it's a horizontal shot, a vertical shot,
Right.
From filling the whole frame. We're always mindful of balance.
Right, and many artists use that same rule of thirds. What about the depth of field? You mentioned a word that I hadn't heard before. Is that just particular to photography? I think it was bokeh.
Yeah, the term bokeh, it really is referencing a depth of field term that throws the background out of focus. And there's some technical reasons why in optics that create that effect, but the idea is the closer that you are to a subject, the more out of focus the background is going to be if you're focusing on the individual, the subject. So, and there's some technical reasons why that happens, but just in optics alone, just if you get close to somebody and you focus, the background is naturally going to go out of focus. But what that does is it helps isolate the subject. And a lot of photographers, like portrait photographers, like that bokeh effect because it isolates the subject and it cleans up the background.
So soft lighting. You get really concentrating on getting the right skin tone. I think you talked about having an African American woman with a great skin tone in her background. How do you fix your light and get the eyes? I think everybody needs to get the eyes right and then capture that personality.
Yeah, it's. I like to use natural light and then use a wall of a white bounce card for fill lighting.
Okay.
So if lighting were coming in on the left side of your face, and over here I would actually have a bounce card that would be filling in your left side of your face, right to the viewer, and that would actually help so you get a nice balanced ratio. It's more flat tones, it's not high contrast, but it's using a single light source and then a softer light that's actually bouncing into the soft areas.
So fill light.
Yeah, so that fill light. But when you're using artificial light, like a strobe, a flash, there are all different types of modifiers that you can use to create that natural light look. If the light source is large enough, the light on the side of your face, on your right side of your face, could actually be mimicked by strobe light through a softbox and create that look of a window because the light source is very large, like a very large softbox. And you wouldn't know the difference if the light has been adjusted properly by the photographer.
And do you diffuse the front of that light
Correct.
box?
Yeah.
So you don't have anything strong here.
Exactly. It softens the edges. There's even a way to add a double diffusion, which requires a higher power light source, but you get softer and softer light. So it's nice.
Now, how much you copied your photos right onto the computer? Technology
Right.
of photography has come so far.
Uh-huh.
Do you manipulate? How much manipulation do you do on your portraits in the computer?
Uh-huh. So I have a very high moral value that I put on the work that I do, and the skill I have in looking and finding and capturing the light. So that's where most of my time goes into, is making sure that I light things properly.
Right.
I don't like to do a lot of manipulation later on. If anything, it's to clean up what's there. It's not to create anything that's not there. So that's why I selectively use soft light, whether it's a combination of window light and a combination of strobe light, so the subject is fully lit. But I do very little in post-processing, other than making sure that there is white balance and the skin tone is proper, that type of thing. Yeah.
What's your favorite thing to photograph?
People. I love to photograph people.
How do you catch that little spark in the eye?
So a lot of some great photographers out there will talk about that decisive moment. I have a photojournalism background, so I pride myself on waiting for that moment that comes along, even in a portrait setting. It's not just about making a photograph, but the photograph is really something that the subject gives to you. It's not something that I'm taking from them. You have to take your time and really wait for them to offer that up to you. And that just requires a lot of patience. It means you've got to be prepared.
Yeah.
So you can't, because you're not going to ask them to do it again.
No,
Because it's natural.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I do, and you saw this during the session, is that people ask them to close their eyes and open up. And that way it's natural. And they're not, because you can tell a real smile from a fake smile is really a combination of what the eyes do and what the mouth is doing all at the same time. So, and that's the moment that I look for, is where those eyes and the mouth and the facial expressions come together, and it's unexpected, but you know it when you see it. So that's what I focus on. So the rest of it is just making sure that the equipment works properly, that I've got enough light, got enough power, my batteries are working okay. All that's got to be all straightened out ahead of time. The rest of it is, when you're on with the subject, you have to be patient, and you grab it when it happens.
So how much background do you do when somebody calls you up and they want their portrait done? How much background do you tell them to bring? Their own clothes? Do you suggest what they do? Any props that they want? Do they bring in their pets? You know, how do you get them to come in with what you need?
Well, making a portrait, there are different levels of portraiture. There is just a headshot that's a business portrait, and that's going to be business attire. It's going to be short. It needs to be well lit. Everything needs to be sharp and focused. The background needs to be clean. There's not a lot of background other than how is this going to be used.
Okay.
The portraits that I like to shoot, the environmental portraits, are, tell me about you as a person, and asking a lot of open-ended questions. It's a discovery process, and I like to do that face-to-face. It's like when I work with a bride and a groom and find out how did they meet.
Right.
And find out more about them. And I don't have my camera in hand. I've got a pad of paper in hand, and I'm just taking notes so I can understand them as people and their families. In the same way with an individual is to really understand who they are as a person, what's important to them, their family, maybe a challenging situation that they had to come through to take them where they are.
Yeah.
You were here earlier where we photographed a woman of strength, and that was all part of that session, is just kind of understanding who they are, what they've been through, but also then photographing them in a certain way to communicate that. And that's where the fun really comes into working with portraiture, is matching that, who they are, with then describing that with light.
How does that photojournalism background evolve into what you're doing now? It sounds like you're finding that story in the person's life.
Yeah. A lot of, being a photojournalist is really about disappearing from the scene. And it's photographing people when they don't know that they're being photographed. That's so we can really capture them as who they are. And even in portraiture, sometimes an individual will look away and you capture a moment that they didn't really expect that you'd get, but it really tells everything about them.
Yeah.
And they'd think that you're going to use that picture? That really? And I'm like, yes, this is really this is the moment when you showed yourself to me. It may not be the portrait that you want to hang on your wall, but it is a story that we've captured in that person.
Oh, that's great.
So, and those are my keepers. Those are the ones that I take pride in, are the ones that where we're able to uncover something in a person that they didn't realize that I'd be able to capture. So.
Those surprising moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes the job really fun. So. It's like the guacamole moments. So.
No, say cheese, say guacamole. That was funny.
Yeah.
So if someone wants to get in touch with you, they really like what you're saying and,
Sure.
and want their portrait done, a family
Yeah.
portrait or singly,
Yeah.
how would they get in touch
Yeah.
with you?
So the best way is my cell phone number, which is 603-801-7473. And it's Long Hill Photography, and my website is longhillphoto.com. And for more about the Women of Strength, you want to head over to learn about that project that I'm working on right now, which is womenofstrengthphotoproject.org. So.
Now that's something you've initiated, and you're meeting these incredible women, having their bios written, and we sat in on a photo session, a remarkable young lady, and so that's a project that's ongoing.
Yeah,
started, and hopefully
yeah.
you'll keep adding to it.
It's 12 months away, but it's a pleasure to work with some of these terrific women.
Yeah, it's great. So we'll tune into
Sure.
your website to see that.
Perfect.
Very good.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us here
Sure.
today.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks for tuning in to my studio. This is Jeannie Barrett. Have a great day. Hi, welcome to my studio at Access Nashua. We're lucky to have Scot Langdon come to our studio and explain more about what he was doing during the photo shoot. In our interview, we talked about the theories that he uses when he shoots a portrait. But now we're going to talk about, actually see some of the work he's doing and talk about what it is he's trying to accomplish and see some of the finished film. Scott, thank you for coming in.
Great.
And we're going to look at some of the film that we shot while you were doing the photo shoot with Kara Griffin. And hopefully you can explain to me some of the things that you're trying to accomplish and how you manage that. You're angling your camera and adjusting the light. Can you tell us why that's important here?
Sure. So, well, thanks for having me again. So what I'm doing here in this shot is using the window light only. Excuse me. And I'm positioning her to light one side of her face, and also have positioning her head in a way that we're able to get window light, but also get the highlights or the catch lights in her eyes.
Oh.
So I'm moving her head a little bit, so I pick up the highlights in her eyes from the window, but have her face angled enough that we get that definition across her nose and some spill to the other side of her face, and then using flash in a way to fill in where we need to, but it's primarily window light.
In this clip, you took a lot of time to reposition this light box, or the bounce light that you call it?
Softbox.
Softbox.
Yeah.
And does that operate as a strobe?
It does. It's softened. It's reflected into. It's got a silver reflector surface, but then there is a translucent piece that can be used over the strobe to soften the light as it comes out, and that's to
mimic the light that's coming from the window.
Okay, I think we're going to see another clip. In this particular shot that we're going to be seeing, you're setting Kara on a tuffet. You're getting some props to help tell her story.
Yeah.
Do you ask when you're setting up a portrait to have them bring things?
Yes, because part of her story, part of her rehabilitation after having a concussion was kind of self-imposed. So she walked the Appalachian Trail.
That's amazing.
So I asked her to bring in some of her tools of the trade, so to speak, from her trip. So she chose to bring in a backpack and some walking poles.
Wow.
So, so I wanted to get some images of her with those things because she lived with them for 7 months. Those were her tools. So she brought those in, and I wanted something representative of her trip, and so that's what she brought in. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes less is more.
Yeah.
And just having it in the background or in the foreground, and that she's not necessarily holding them, that says enough. So when you look at the image, it's an environmental portrait. So you see the individual and you see these items. And as the viewer, you look at that, and that tells the story. You know that she's a hiker, and here's a portrait, but we don't have to show her hiking because we just have enough to tell the story.
And when you do props like this, are you thinking about the composition, that rule of thirds that we talked about in our interview?
Yeah, as I was putting that together, I wanted enough of those hiking poles on her lap, but I didn't want them up near her face.
Okay.
So I wanted to make sure, and I like the angle across her lap, as opposed to having her hold them straight up and down, because that would have competed with her face.
Oh, very thoughtful.
And I didn't want the backpack in front because it would dominate the photo, so I put it behind her.
I see. So
that
really
way
on
she still was the dominant subject, and I wanted to make the parts really secondary. So I tried to keep them really away from her face.
Now you just adjusted some of the light box and that. When you do introduce props into a portrait, are you thinking about how the light reflects off those too?
Not so much, because we're not talking about, you know, a mirror or stainless steel or chrome. In this case, it was pretty. There wasn't a lot that would reflect off of it, but you know, anytime that I light anything, you know, I'm trying to keep those objects really away from the light as much as possible. But in this case, it really wouldn't have mattered. In post-processing, if there was any problem, I could have toned it down. Okay.
All right. We had talked about bokeh, the depth of field.
Sure.
Is that something that you're adjusting here with the curtain?
So with the backdrop, I try to keep that at least 4 or 5 feet away, if not further away, or farther away from the subject, because when I'm focused on her, I want to make sure that the background is out of focus, or creates that lots of depth of field where it's bokeh, which is it's soft and it creates a natural soft background. So the background itself should not be in focus, just the subject.
Just the subject.
And the background really goes dark. Once you adjust exposure for the subject, that background should really be more of a dark gray or even black.
Just disappear.
It's going to disappear because I'm lighting her and I'm not lighting the background.
I see.
And whether it's in focus or not also has to do with how close I am to the subject as to how focused that background or out of focus will be. And that's where the choice of lens and the choice of aperture comes into play.
Oh my. So the equipment that you're using, you know, the optics, there's a lot of technical business with that. That's part of just taking that photograph. It's you in your eye, your interpretation through the technology of these optical.
Right. Choice of lens. Typically with a portrait, I'm looking for a little bit of a telephoto, not a lot, but enough that I can isolate her from the background and create that depth of field and the bokeh.
Ah, guacamole.
When you open up,
Oh.
say guacamole.
You use that to kind of break the ice. Is that instead of cheese? Is it too cheesy, or
Right.
do you like guacamole with your cheese?
So that actually came from my wife, the guacamole thing. That wasn't. She used that with some kids that she was photographing once, and I picked it up. A lot of times when you force people to smile or not smile, or to look at you or pose, they're uncomfortable. So,
Yeah.
so what I'd have people do is close their eyes, no blank look on their face, close their eyes, and when I count to 3, they open up, and I'd have them say guacamole, as my wife did. And it stretches the mouth, it creates a smile, and it's fun. And it changes the mood, especially for little kids, because they don't even know what guacamole is, but they know that it's a funny word.
Yeah, and get the smiling eyes
Yeah,
at the same
absolutely.
time. At the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Well, you took several photos of Cara in front of the window, closer to the window than we saw in just that last clip. Why did you move her closer? And it really worked that the windows were frosted with years of dirt on them, because it really diffused that light and made her just look so amazing.
Right. So, so what I did was, when I placed her against the window, and there were a number of pictures I took with her looking outside the window, but I didn't get enough of her face. And so what I did was I used that window to frame her as the subject, and the way that I cropped it there with a little bit of the window, with the dark window frame,
Yeah.
and I positioned her head actually right there in the corner, so you get the window frames on her left side, camera right, and you get the wall lit up on the camera left side, or her right side as she's facing the camera. So you get that, it's a natural backdrop of her, and you get the window light that's lighting up the left side of her face,
Yeah.
and it kind of strikes her nose and a little bit of her right eye. But it's very soft, it's all natural, there's nothing that's here other than posing her against, having her turn her head a certain way, and then catching a moment. And that smile is a moment that it really fleets. It comes and it goes, and you just have to be ready.
Yeah.
So the rest of it's just timing.
It's not that forced guacamole moment.
No.
She just looks like it
That's
was
right.
part of a conversation.
I think she was laughing.
Yeah.
And it was the moment probably after the initial laugh when she paused for a second. So, and that's what I look for. I look for those because the smile, the eyes, everything is her. That's her personality right there.
Yeah. Oh, we talked about the decisive moment. I think you definitely captured it there.
Right.
I think not only the softness and the personality of her, but I like the backdrop with the angles because it just accentuates the softness and the femininity that she possesses. I like the perspective of the bars on the window.
Right.
I think you really captured
Right.
that, and leaving the angles in the back.
Right.
Is a good contrast also.
The other thing too was I didn't want to crop that too close to her head. I wanted to leave a lot of space above that image to be able to really show where she is, and to show the window frame, and to show where she is and the light, where the light's coming from, instead of a headshot or something really tight. This is a portrait. This is an environmental portrait, and I wanted to show her environment.
Why do you call it an environmental portrait?
Because we're showing, we're at a mill building, so let's show off the mill building.
Okay.
Let's, you know, she's in the mill building by a window. There's a lot of character
Yeah.
in that window frame. There's brick behind her. There are pipes behind her. The window frame itself, there's peeling paint coming off of that. It has lots of texture.
Yeah, texture.
And you want to show that. You want to
Yeah.
show. You want to show that off in addition to her. So it's about the environmental piece to it is the environment that she's in right then and there. And that's where the word environmental portrait comes from.
Ah.
So you know, in a photographer's sense, the environment should reflect who they are as a person. So you might take a picture of a potter doing their work with their pottery studio behind them. And that's an environmental portrait because they're a
yes.
potter
Yeah.
in a potter's environment. Now, in this case, we're in a mill building, but we want to make sure that we show the mill building and the character of the mill building in addition to her as a person.
Well, I also get a part of her story there too, because with concussion and any head trauma, you know, usually light is very painful and it just exacerbates the condition.
Sure.
And here you have her laughing in the light and light all around her head. And I think that really is like the exclamation point on her story, if you will.
Sure.
It just looks joyous. Nice.
So if you end up showing the other image, there is another image
We
that
will
we might
see
show.
the other image, very powerful. And now this is, basically, I'd like to talk about this when we talk of your women of strength.
Sure.
And we'll talk more about that.
Okay.
We're talking about the technology of your camera, the equipment that you use. And your camera, I noticed when we were working with it, you're kind of like have a cable or a wire, and you're using your computer and
Sure.
taking thousands, hundreds, thousands of photos digitally and storing them on your computer. Why are you using the computer monitor like here in this particular scene?
So rather than shoot and then look at the back of the camera, which has only a 3-inch
Yes,
monitor,
tiny.
and a lot of times it's not color corrected. I can't really tell how sharp it is. So what I want to be able to do is shoot tethered. That's what they call it, where the computer, I've got a 10-foot cord that goes from the camera to the computer, and I'm shooting right into a gallery or an editing program.
Oh.
So when I shoot, it actually comes up, and I can see the image right there on the screen.
Right.
So I can look at it to make sure that it's sharp, that it's well lit, and I can also show the subject so they can get some feedback
Right.
on what's going on, because that a lot of times they're uneasy about what's happening. So this allows me to say, these look really good, and I want to show these to you. And that builds confidence in them,
Yes,
and it actually
yeah.
makes the rest of the photo shoot actually better.
Oh, I can imagine,
Yeah.
because we got such a kick out of seeing them, you know, shoot, and we're sitting there
Exactly.
and watching you work,
Right.
and then to see the
Right.
finished pieces or what you've captured there. That
The other
was
thing
great.
too is while I'm shooting, they're coming up on the screen, so I have to make sure that I turn it away from the subject, because they'll start looking at the screen
It's
as they're coming up. I've had cases where they've continued to look at the screen and not me at the camera. So you have to be careful how much they can see at the right time.
Wow.
So I usually shoot 20 or 30 images before I even show it to them. So,
Okay. Because that was a great surprise at the end of the photo shoot
yeah,
to see that.
yeah, it was great to allow Kara to see herself and to have her mother see it as well.
Yeah.
So.
I think we did this after that last shot, the one that you wanted for the to tell her story from beginning to end in one shot, where you have her really focused, serious, and just the expression. That's a great still shot you have of her. one of many of the women of strength that you'll be photographing. Can you tell us more about that particular project?
Sure. Back in 2015, it started with photographing a woman, and what developed out of that was the idea of a long-term project called Women of Strength. And as I began to talk to people, that's where Kara's name came up. And these are women who have their own story of them as professionals or students or artists or athletes, that they were able to kind of get through a difficult situation and then continue to give back and pay it forward.
Wow.
So through talking with people in my network, I found out about Kara and her story of having these multiple concussions. So what I envisioned was a photograph of her, a very serious look straight into the camera, and with her holding her head, because
Very intense.
Using the hands in a photograph is very important. How you pose that person with their hands. And I wanted to make sure that if it's a tight shot, that we include her hands in that tight shot. So I had to incorporate her concussion, which was her challenge, into that portrait of her. So that's what I envisioned. So I used that, and also a strobe inside a beauty dish, and it was pretty much right on top of her. And what came about was that photograph of her holding her head.
It's
and looking
more than a
straight.
portrait.
Yeah. And her hair really falls nicely down her, and the light is, we get the catch lights in her eyes, and her fingers are positioned in a way that we don't cover her face too much, but there's a moment there of seriousness.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And that was my vision. That's what I went to capture.
So to get this one photo, we spent a couple hours.
I think so. Yeah.
A
maybe.
lot of
Was it?
shots.
Yeah.
But to get to that, and where she's trusting you, I mean, looking right at you and through the lens,
Yeah.
and into whoever's going to be in that book.
Right.
Now, how has your photojournalist experience helped you with some of these things that you're doing inside a studio now? You're not out in the field anymore.
Well, photojournalism is about real people and real situations, and I continue to look for stories, and the approach is always about that person's story. It's telling a story through photographs, whether it's a single photograph or it's a series of photographs. So what intrigued me about this project was that I got to ask about these situations and their backgrounds and what challenges they faced, and that kind of brought us together. So that's what photojournalism is really understanding their story and telling that through photos. So that's what I continually strive to do.
Capture it all in one.
Right, and it's a moment. It's not video, so I've got to bring that moment together in a single shot in some cases.
Well, I can think of many single photographs from photojournalists that have been published in magazines and papers that really stay with you years and years after they've been published. And working with this book and publishing this book yourself, how far do you plan to reach with that? Do you think that you're going to continue working on that, second editions, first editions, and keep it going?
So this is, it will start as a traveling show. So
Okay.
it's going to be, we'd like to have 12 women I'm about a little bit further than halfway through the 12, and that'll be a traveling show in 2018 is what we're targeting.
That's wonderful.
And so we'll have framed images, and then probably within the year after that, we're going to have a book, hopefully together. This project will never end. I will continue to find women of strength to extend the collection. Whether they all make it into a book, or if we have a second show, or who knows. But right now, we're really looking at that first group.
And what are some of the challenges that these women have faced? We know that Kara had the concussion and brain trauma.
One of the initial woman that I photographed, her family, she and her family are from the Sudan, and then she was born in the early 90s, and her family moved from the Sudan during a war-torn country time during the 90s in the Sudan, and they moved to Egypt to get away from that. And then from Egypt, they actually moved to Manchester, New Hampshire.
Wow.
So although she doesn't remember any of that as a newborn, her family really had to start over from having nothing in Manchester. And she put herself through college.
Wow.
And she's an entrepreneur now.
Wow.
And there are a lot of great things she does, and she works for nonprofits, and she's giving back. So that was kind of the impetus, for this project. Another woman who's in the project, she has worked with individuals that become unemployed for a long period of time, and what she's done is help them with their interviewing skills, their resume writing, making them feel good about themselves so they can get back out there as adults.
So important.
And these are people that are typically, over the age of 50 and have lost their job for some reason. And what she's done is put together a toolkit and a way for them to get back on their feet. And I think it's wonderful.
That's awesome.
So I photographed her. And there are a number of others. Probably another notable is a woman who started off as a circus mime back in the 80s, was one of the founders of a national circus organization for kids. And although there wasn't an overwhelming challenge that she went through, what she did was start an organization that's now nationwide.
Wow.
And has affected the lives of many kids that have gone on to perform professionally in the circus arts. Cirque du Soleil, Ringling Brothers, a number of other organizations. So she continues to give back. She's a movement teacher. She's gone on. She's writing a book right now on the circus arts for kids and how to. So she continues to, for the last 30 years, be involved with the circus arts. So I wanted to make sure that I included her as well.
Well, these are everyday people, unsung heroes that you're shining a spotlight on, and that's really great. In today's world, when we see so much sadness, to see that people are resilient and help one another and have goodness in them and share that. And you also, unsung hero, just for doing this, for recognizing this in people and for bringing that forward and showing the rest of us something that we might not otherwise know.
Right.
We might see these people at the supermarket and never really know the full story.
Right.
So thank you for that.
Sure.
Thank you for that.
My pleasure.
So Scott, again, thank you so much for joining us in our studio, Access Nashua. And I'm Ginny Barrett. Thank you for watching my studio.